Today we are pleased to welcome Dr. Alicia Azure from United Tribes Technical College in Bismarck, North Dakota. Dr. Azure joins us to discuss her two awarded grants, 325M and 325X, projects Meadowlark and Anpao Kin. Both projects received funding in 2024. The Meadowlark project prepares undergrad education students to obtain a North Dakota special education credential that qualifies them for special education licensure. The Anpao Kin project funds the development and implication of an associate's degree in early childhood special education. Thank you, Dr. Azure, for taking the time to meet today. To begin, could you please tell us a little about your two projects, their primary goals, and the populations they aim to serve?
Hello, Rae, and thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. The Meadowlark project, I'll start with that one, the 325M. This is a professional development grant, a personnel prep grant, similar to ones we've had in the past. And United Tribes Technical College has had quite a bit of success with these grants. I would say we have, roughly, 30 to 35 all Native people who are completed with their special ed credential or a special ed degree, through the support from these grants. And so we hadn't had one for a couple of years, so I was excited to see the opportunity to apply again. The Anpao Kin is, which is Lakota for a new dawn or a new day, is that one is for program development. We chose to write it for an early childhood special ed associate's degree, and one of the reason for selecting this particular emphasis was because quite a few of the tribal colleges have early childhood education degrees, but none of them have early childhood special ed. And so the hope is that by an early childhood special ed degree has a lot of child development in it, coursework. And so we wanted to build on, what is in the existing degrees at some of these colleges, and then hope that people who completed their associate's degree in early childhood special ed would continue on and get a bachelor's degree. So the grant is intended to start an early childhood special ed degree here, an associate's degree here at United Tribes Technical College, but we plan to invite other colleges to learn from the model, to use the model to create their own.
So what makes these personnel preparation grants unique or, particularly meaningful to your institution at UTTC?
United Tribes is we are a tribal college, and the federal definition for a tribal college, that we are required to have at least 50%. Our student population has to reflect at least 50% membership in federally recognized tribes. United Tribes each year we have about 95% enrolled members. So we have a real high number of Native people attending school here. And so, I think that in itself is unique, just because there's only one other tribal college, Sintiglaska in Mission, South Dakota, that offers special ed degrees. And so, but our goal is to increase the number of special education personnel, particularly those who are Native, so that to address the shortage of special educators, not only in tribal communities, but elsewhere. There's a real shortage. And we, United Tribes is, we are good at doing what we do. We have a high persistence and retention rate. As a tribal college in the state of North Dakota, there's probably roughly 20 institutions of higher ed. And I had seen a report where we were 5th in the state among the public, private, and tribal higher ed institutions as far as retention. So our students, we have a lot of supports here, and we graduate students who are in our case are able to meet teacher licensure and go on to be professional educators.
Oh, those are some good statistics. So as we can see, the two projects have a significant impact and importance for future special educators and current and for future special education students, specifically among the Native populations. So thinking about that, what inspires you and your team to do this work?
Well, as is typical at tribal colleges, it's there's usually one person, so I don't have a team. But the team is, we look at it, there's usually one person at each tribal college, but what we do is we work with other tribal colleges, so that's our, we make that our team. I visited with some of the other tribal colleges, and said that, it goes back to that, if you build it, they will come. It's like, if we put this model together, here at United Tribes, are other colleges interested in implementing it? And they are. And I think a lot of it is that they don't think they can do it. They don't think they have the capacity. I'm the only person here at United Tribes with a special ed degree. And so, my colleagues at other tribal colleges don't have special ed degrees, but there's ways to be creative, and find, we call them community-based faculty. It's faculty that are, some people call them adjuncts, but it's, they're in the community, they're active teachers. We call on them because they're current and they're well qualified, and so, there are ways to overcome things like staffing challenges. And so some of it is, I've been at United Tribes for a long time. And so, you learn it through experience. And so, that's why I wanted to, create these programs and set them up so that, that hopefully that they're successful, and we have every reason to believe they will be as far as recruiting students. And so that other tribal colleges can use them as a model.
Okay, so going off of that, how are your programs supporting high needs children and youth and disabilities in your community or the state?
Well, when we first started offering bachelor's degrees, which is in 2012, so we haven't been offering bachelor's degrees for I mean that's fairly recent in the scope of things, but it was interesting because there was three of us who sat down and talked about it, and we were all former pre-K-12 teachers. And, I'm non-native, but I've always taught. My husband and children are from Standing Rock. And so we live there. And so I've always taught, in tribal schools. And so the three of us had it was our goal, without compromise, that we would prepare teachers to teach any children, but particularly those in tribal communities. There are programs that, sometimes try to increase the numbers of teachers, and sometimes they look more at output than input. And so, but we were, committed to making sure that we had a rigorous program, that we wanted our students to rise to this level of expectation, to these standards, because, we know that the more qualified a teacher, the higher the impact on student learning for the students that they're going to teach, regardless of, for all students, regardless of those with, with special needs. We need good teachers.
Yeah. And thinking about, the outcome, and especially, when working with Native population, I think that's really important. So when you're thinking about the scholars that are going to be going through this program, what specific skills or knowledge are they going to gain through the two projects that you have?
Well, the thing, there's the coursework, of course, but there's also, what we do is we get the students out of their comfort zone a little bit, or I guess the grants call them scholars, call them students, but they, for example, we have an elementary school here on campus. And so all of our scholars, they want to do their field placements, their field experiences in the school, because it's a BIA contract school, and it's there are Native children there, and there are Native teachers, and so that's their comfort zone. But they are able to do some of their field placements over there, but we have 5 field placements, and so 5 levels. And so the first 2 they can do in that school, but then the other 3, and I hate to say we force, but we make them go into town because it gets them out of their comfort zone. And they tend to, they come to campus much like myself, first generation students from a small town, and they're a little bit intimidated, by, Bismarck has, roughly 75,000 people, which in North Dakota, that's a big city. And so and so they're intimidated about it. They think they don't know everything that they have to offer. And so we make them get out of their comfort zone and go into, do their field placements in town. And we overwhelmingly get positive feedback on that.
Now, when you're thinking about like the 325M and the 325X grant supports personnel development for minority serving institutions, how does your program support students for historically underrepresented or underserved backgrounds?
One thing is different with the current 325M is that the scholars don't have to all receive the same amount. That used to support that used to be as I understood it, that didn't used to be the case. So that all scholars had to, there were kind of limits on what you could do to support them. Our students have, sometimes have families. They come to campus and sometimes they live on campus, sometimes they live in the community, but it's hard for them to have a part-time job because they have, children or dependents, maybe, relatives or, family that stays with them. And so the nice thing about the support with 325M is that it allows, that each scholar can get a different amount based on their needs. So if, somebody might have more need than others, and so, we do know that we have students who don't have children who tend to try to work a couple jobs. And then it's just to support themselves. And then they struggle with their coursework and, because they're tired, they're overdoing it. And so if we're able to help them with student support that, offsets the cost of their rent or their transportation, getting back and forth to campus or whatever it is, then that allows the students to focus on what they're here for, and that is to get an education and become, licensed professionals.
And that's always good at having those support systems in place, especially, within Native communities, it's always harder. It seems
Yes.
like because I personally feel like sometimes these institutions were not made for us, but at the same time, if these type of support systems are in place, that makes it more feel like you're able to complete what you started.
Yes, agree.
Yeah.
There was one other thing too that we're allowed. Tribal colleges are, we can do things. We can maneuver quickly. We don't have the red tape and the bureaucracy that some institutions have. So we're able to be real responsive to students' needs. And so it's like for example with the Praxis core. Some institutions they require students to pass certain admissions tests to get into the education department. And we can be flexible on that. I had a student, in fact, she was from Chinle, Arizona, and she came up here but she was a little bit older and she'd been out of school for a while. And so when she took the Praxis core exam, she hadn't taken a math class for probably 15 years. So she didn't do well on it. And so instead of telling her that, well, you can't be in the education program because you can't pass the math, is that we're able to enroll them provisionally and then, help her, like with tutoring and taking some math classes. And, because it's one of those things that, that the students that are straight out of high school, they've had it in the last couple of years, in math, if you don't use it, you don't always retain it. And so we're able to do that. So she didn't pass her, she passed her Praxis core about a month before she student taught, but she made it and she student taught and now she's been a teacher at Chinle for a couple of years now. And so just being able to do those types of things, is, to look at students individually. We don't want our policies to get in the way of prohibiting somebody who, has the aptitude and would make a great teacher. We don't want policies to get in the way and prevent that from happening.
That's great. So how has being housed like as at a TCU shaped the values and directions of your grants?
Well, we're more, we say that, tribal colleges are typically, sometimes when the student-centered learning was the big buzzword, and we thought we've always been student-centered, and so, and then we've, as far as, being collaborative in nature, we've always collaborated. There's a lot of those things that are just, they're kind of what tribal colleges do. When you have limited resources, you collaborate, you work together, so those are the types of things that are, that we do well, so and then I think, the students tell us that sometimes that we believed it in them when nobody else did, and we're their like biggest cheerleaders. And, even after our students graduate, we get invited to kids' birthday parties, and it's like, it's almost like more like a family, and so, but we hear that a lot, is that, some, it's sad to say, but some of them will say nobody at home, believed in me, but when I got here, you guys, helped me realize that I could do this, and so I think there's, and again, that might be from being small, but we really get to know our students.
And that's great because I think that those building those relationships is very important. And I think that that's very important in every Native community because we want to know who can we relate to, who are related to, who do we have a connection to, and that that relationship building is very important. So next, I would love to discuss, what's going well in your programs. Which one of, what are one or two early successes, innovations, or stories of impact that you've seen so far?
Well, I think right now we're a little early in these two grants. We just started. Well, we're still in year one on one of them, the tail end, and then just started year two in the other one. But one of the things that I had mentioned was, if we have limited, if our capacity is limited in a certain area, is reaching out to others. And so one thing that's gone really well is that for the 325M, like I said, I'm the only one here with a special ed graduate degree, but I haven't taught I've been in teacher ed for, 20, 25 years. And so, I haven't taught lately, and we've always prided ourselves in our faculty being current, with what, with the education, all the changes that are happening. So I was able to through some other teachers that I know, we were able to find a woman who is she's a practicing special education teacher, and she's faculty at a mainstream institution in a higher ed college and university in North Dakota, and so she's teaching some courses for us, and she's just loving it. She said that she's taught here before, and that she said, there are places, like where her main job is, that the students, she said, they come in more prepared academically, but she said they don't have the rich life experiences that our students have, and so she looks at that as a real value, and so, because those are the things that you can't teach, so it's nice, for somebody to recognize that. I was also fortunate to find two consultants who are they just completed their early childhood special ed doctorates through University of Illinois Chicago, and they're doing some consultant work with me on the 325X. So I think having these recognizing that we have limitations, but then knowing who to reach out to. And more importantly, is having people out there who are willing to help us, and are interested in it. So that's been real. It's a way to serve a need, and create a program for, that has high impact, even if we don't have the faculty here ourselves.
That's awesome. And I think from a personal experience, I'm jealous because I wish I went to, a special ed preparation program that was specifically for Native teachers and Native populations.
Mm.
Because, it is rare to see people like us in this field.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are there any tools or approaches, partnerships that you have that have been especially helpful in strengthening these programs that you have?
Well, I think, like I said, I would go back to like some of the collaborations is, I have to give kudos to Sintiglaska University in South Dakota, because they're kind of like the grandmother TCU, for this part of the country. Is that they had a special ed bachelor's degree, they have a special ed master's degree, and they've always been very open and willing to share, resources and materials with us. We actually partnered with them on one of our previous OSEP grants because we didn't have any programming here in special ed. And so the students took the classes on the campus of United Tribes, but the degrees were conferred, through Sintiglaska. So, those types of things, going back to these, finding partners, that, and then it was especially beneficial because it was a tribal college. Our student population represents about 75 different tribal groups, tribal nations every semester. And, but they didn't care that it was a Sakanju Lakota college. They liked that it was a tribal college. It's kind of like you said, the students prefer to, they want to go to a college that recognizes who they are and affirms who they are, and then also has a really good reputation, so that, and we had a student tell us that, one time, she was like, I want to have to work because I don't want it to be just another one of those Indian programs. And I thought, I knew exactly what she was talking about. She said, when I graduate from United Tribes, I want to be proud of my degree. And so we work them.
So now I would like to, talk about maybe hearing some advice that you have based on your experiences. What lessons have you learned as a PI that you like to share with others?
Well, I think, probably the biggest lesson is to, to have a relationship with your project officer. It's, I remember the first grant that I had, and it wasn't an OSEP grant, but I was a kindergarten teacher and I started at the college, and I asked and I was given this grant, and it was $1 million grant, and I was, asked to oversee it. And I had never even seen a grant proposal before. And so I've always been comfortable. If I don't know what I'm doing, I don't pretend that I do. I'm always been comfortable asking people, for assistance, to help me out. So I called the project officer in DC, and I told her, I said, 3 months ago, I was teaching kindergarten. I've never given a grade other than an S or a U. I said, I don't know anything about grants. And I always remembered it because she called me honey, and she was like, don't worry, honey. She said, we'll get through this, and we did, and so I look at the project officers that I've had over the years, and I think, I had Marianne McDermott, with OSEP for years, and until she retired. And now with Tracy Dixon, I think if there's one lesson learned, it's, if you have any questions at all, go to your project officer, because they, first of all, it seems like they, no matter what you come up with, they've experienced it. And they, if they don't have an answer, they'll find out, and so, and just a great resource. And so don't ever think that you're out here alone. And that was one of the reasons why I was so supportive of the Dream team, the Dream Center, is because, so many of us are out here by ourselves. So we need that support. We need somebody, that we can just bounce ideas off, or help us out with a form, or some processes. And so, that's the only way that any of us can be successful, is if we all work together.
Yeah, and especially TCUs are few and far in between. So,
Yep.
being able to, create those teams and create those relationships is important. So, do you have any advice for faculty who are thinking about applying for an OSEP, personnel preparation grant?
Well, right now I am, I've been trying to encourage people at TCUs to apply for it, to come to the first workshop that Dream is putting on for TCUs. And part of the reason, and what I tell them is that, I am them. I was them. I like having grants. I didn't know how to write grants, but I went to a couple, the grant workshops that the Monarch Center had put on. And I remember, a gentleman who was conducting the workshop said, right from your heart. He was like, these readers have no idea, what the population is, how you live, how your students live. So he said, make sure that you tell them a picture, tell them a story that'll give them a picture of who you are and where you are. And I guess I realized that because I think it's gotten better, but real often the people who read the grants, most people don't know too much about tribal colleges, and so I think that, but as far as faculty go, again, there are resources and, that will support you in the process. And then once you write a grant, it gets easier, and you can use the same, the same components, for a number of different competitions, and just change it a little bit, and then none of us has grant writers. I heard that Turtle Mountain College had a sponsored programs office. They had a grant writer. I heard that Northwest Indian College has a grant writer, but those are exceptions. And the rest of us, if you want to write a grant, we do it ourselves. And so but if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's not as hard, if you have support, you can do it.
Yeah, and I'm actually through this Dream Center, I'm learning a lot, and it makes
Yeah.
me interested because then my dream down the future is to, yeah, like to increase this, especially
Mhm.
for special ed programs within Native communities. So as we conclude, we love to hear what's next in your program. Like, do you want to share any upcoming, milestones, goals, or expansions?
Well, I think right now, like I said, we're trying to recruit scholars for the 325M. We've been asked if we would move into a master's degree program. Because particularly our students that have graduated with their bachelor's degrees. But again, we're small, and so it's um, because there's a shortage, particularly in special ed, there's also a shortage of special ed faculty. But I think I'm committed to seeing these grants through. I'm committed to making sure that it's almost like I need somebody to take my place. I'm trying to find a successor, and so and I'm, hoping it'll be, one of my graduates who have talked about it. And so yeah, but as far as right now, we have semester start, Rae, and we just got done with a powwow with about 15,000 people on campus. So yeah, right now my goal is get this semester off to a good start, and yeah, so check back with me on that question.
Well, even having a power is a success,
It is, it
because
is,
that's what brings the community together.
it
Yeah.
is. And we didn't have, and all of our students are safe and accounted for, today. And so, and that might not seem like a big deal, but it is, because a lot of them have never been, around this many people before. And so we wanted to make sure, first and foremost, that they were safe. And so they were they're all accounted for today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for meeting today and sharing your experiences on your two grants, your 325M and 325X grants. We appreciate faculty like you who are dedicated to preparing the next generation of special education professionals to serve children with disabilities. So thank you so much.
You bet. Nice visiting with you, Rae.